Today, behind Watchgate, you saw it here first. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to the latest post covering finance and problem news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Today I'm joined by Robbie Barwick from the Citizens Party. Hi Robbie.
Hi Martin.
Well, what a week it's been, of course, with Christine Holgate in Canberra and all of the things that we were discussing over the previous 2 or 3 months, and we were being accused of, conspiracy theories and flying kites. It's all come home to roost exactly as we predicted.
Yes, you saw it here first, and that's an important thing to say. Let me tell you, because what you're witnessing, we're talking about the Christine Holgate testimony in Parliament this week. It has blown out all the gaskets of Australian politics, and it deserves to. There's all sorts of repercussions that are flowing from that, which we're going to talk about now, but. Your channel, Martin, our channel, uniquely push this hard, right? I'll give a call out to our mate Alex at Nuggets News as well, Alex Saunders. I remember he listened to what we were saying, was one of the first to take an interest. And we did it at a time when everyone else was ducking for cover, because as one well-connected political person said to me this week, you don't defend corporate executives. Well, we did, not because she's a corporate executive, but because we found out very quickly what any journalist could have found out, what the truth was. And we publicised that. And the truth was so different to what everyone was spoon-fed through the media and the politicians that once enough people understood, we've been able to turn this around on its head. But it was these channels that put the message out there, including, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this, the question of the agenda. That's what came out in the hearings, which was this bigger question of the privatisation agenda that Christine Holgate got in the front of. And all the serious media in Australia are now talking about that, right? People in the Senate committee like Kim Carr of the Labor Party picked up on that big time. I mean, I'm stunned at how much the media that sometimes I'm not that respectful of, to be honest, but they have actually finally got this idea, right? Because Christine Holgate fearlessly laid it out. So that's how, as you and I were saying, I mean, we want, we keep coming back to this theme, Martin. We want people, the viewers who participate in these campaigns to understand that we have these successes. It's not sexy and it's not rocket science. This is how the sausage is made. And then you get some spectacular days like Tuesday this week with Christine Holgate's testimony.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth underscoring a couple of things, right? So, the 4 key points, the whole thing about, the watches were 2 years ago, wasn't recent, it wasn't whilst the COVID thing was raging. The fact that it was within her gift to do it, question of judgment, but that's different. That's not anything other than just, that's the sort of lady she is. But the point is, it was all to do with that critical cash flow from the banks to support Australia Post, to turn it into a profitable entity, right? And, for the first time for a long time, actually started moving the dial into positive, which is, of course, what people were not wanting to see, because, of course, the big agenda, as you say, was effectively the slicing and dicing and the killing off and the selling off of bits of Australia Post to reduce it from a very, very important service for the whole of Australia and all Australians to essentially just parcel delivery and a few add-ons. I mean, that is the real agenda. That's the real question we need to understand. And as you and I have said before, but we're going to say it again, this whole privatisation agenda is driven from a particular philosophical point of view when it comes to politics, right? Neoliberalism. Basically, the private sector can only do it, the public sector can't, except the private sector can't. We know that now because there's chapter and verse on so many different privatised things that have fallen over wherever you look around the world. What happens is the bankers and the fat cats get rich on it, but actually the service declines, the availability of capability that should be available to all Australians as part of, the normal furniture of the landscape, as it were, disappears. And this is not going to happen here because now at least people are alert to it.
I'm more convinced than ever that the particular plan for privatisation, because Australia Post is a dicey entity, there is a legal requirement to provide postal services that the government has. I mean, postal services are stipulated in the Constitution, right? So the legal requirement, though, applies to mail. It doesn't apply, well, it should, but for whatever reason, they've decided it doesn't apply to parcels.
Yes.
So your letter, it applies to that, it doesn't apply to parcels. And in recent times, there's less letters sent thanks to email and a lot more parcels sent. And it's incredibly profitable. Australia Post has the widest footprint. It's got the most efficient parcel delivery. And there's an interview that the minister gave yesterday as part of the damage control that they've been in because of Christine Holgate's testimony, where he was trying his best to shoot down everything she said.
Actually almost justifies Christine Holgate's point that it should be an integrated business, but BCG recommended that it should be split off according to her. So what you're saying to me is that parcel business for sale? Is it going to be split off and sold under this government, future governments, do you believe?
The parcel business is a key part of Australia Post.
But is it for sale?
No.
Will it be sold under this government?
That is not our intention, no.
That is not your intention.
No.
And so as a result, what Christine Holgate fears is that she lost her job because she opposed those recommendations from BCG?
I think that is not at all an accurate characterisation of what's happened. Look, can I say, I understand this has been a very difficult process for Christine Holgate. I worked closely with her for a year and a half. As she said, we would meet quite regularly, speak quite regularly. She was a very passionate and committed executive, and as Lucio Di Bartolomeo, the chair of Australia Post, has said, she was an effective chair of Australia Post. So I understand this has been a very difficult process for her, and naturally, when you look at somebody going through that, you wish that didn't have to happen.
If you watch the whole interview, it goes for 14 minutes, it's with Ross Greenwood. And so he's genuinely trying to shoot down everything she said. When I say genuinely, not genuinely motivated, but he's doing his best to be very unequivocal. He's shooting it down. And when Ross Greenwood asked me about privatisation, he shot that down. And when Ross Greenwood honed in, though, on the specific of the parcels, then the minister reverted to type, political speak, and said in a much more equivocating way, it's not our intention to do that. And as soon as I heard those words, I thought that's what every challenger says just before they roll their leader, right? That's this sort of thing. And no damn way was it not their intention to do that. And they had the former CEO who was there for 3 years, who sat in and argued with the Boston Consulting Group review, and that this should not happen and would not happen under her watch. She laid it all out the day before, and we're supposed to say the minister, this sly-looking guy, is like, trust me. Well, I challenge the Australian people to watch his interview and then watch Christine Holgate's off the top of her head, passionate testimony, laying out her vision for Australia Post, and you tell me who you believe. Hashtag I believe Christine Holgate. So it's all come tumbling out, and it's the beginning. What's today? Thursday. The testimony was on Tuesday, 48 hours ago. This is just the beginning of it. The public's going to see a lot more attention on this, and the political repercussions roll from there. So, watch this space. We'll come up with ways you can help, and trust me, we will, as we always do. But yeah, wait to see it happen. One thing, Martin, before we continue, it would be remiss of me to say not say, please, everyone watching this, press pause, click on the link below, and sign and share the petition. Now's the time to really supercharge this petition. We're nearly at 10,000 signatures. In these settings, there's no reason we shouldn't get it to 50,000 very fast, right? And more and beyond. You know, we're getting messages from all around Australia. People are finally paying attention. Not least because the day before the hearing, Australia Post rushed out the announcement of a new CEO, the biggest to Parliament and absolute contempt for Parliament and due process. And they did it under the minister's instructions. There is a gangster running our country named Scott Morrison. He's a gangster, and he's surrounded by capos, right? They think they're untouchable. They're acting that way. And I don't, I'm talking about the actual concretes of what they do. And here is due process. And they could not have treated it any worse than they did by rushing at that announcement the day before. So people are enraged about that, and everyone paid attention to the hearing as a result. Everyone around the country watched it. The 2 TV channels carried it live. The two 24-hour news channels carried it live. I know a politician who was due to speak at his normal slot on one of them, and he got bumped because they said, sorry, we're sticking with this. Normally these hearings are boring, right? No, sorry, we're sticking with this. And they stuck with it for hours. It was high drama. But it came about, because I'm promoting the petition now, it came about because of our campaign. And a big part of that campaign the last few weeks is this petition. So if you haven't signed it yet, stop now and sign it straight away and share it. And if you have, stop now and share it again, please. We've got to get this zooming big time.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Robbie, the petition is in 2 parts: reinstate Christine Holgate and make sure that Scott Morrison actually apologises for the harm and hurt that he did. And one of the things that came through to me in spades from her testimony to the Senate was just how much, physically and mentally it affected her directly, as well as the broader issues that we're touching.
I think it's worth people reflecting on that. So I was present in the hearing room for the testimony, but there was a section where it was in camera, and that meant just Christine and the senators. So I wasn't present for that, but I have a fair idea what was said. She had touched on it earlier. She has openly talked about how suicidal she became, and I don't think people should be cynical about that. This is not a ploy. You've got to appreciate. It's not that Christine Holgate has had a charmed life. She's had to struggle through lots of things. She's a working class girl from the UK, right? She's a charming person who does very well in business because she's a very empathetic person and connects well to people. And she's done very well in business for that reason. That's why she runs business as well. But she hasn't had a charmed life. She knows how to struggle, except what she had was coming, she's not 21 anymore. She'd be above 50. And I apologise for talking about a woman's age, but nevertheless. So she's on the second side of her career, not the first side. And here she has had a good career, an exceptional career. And you those who followed the markets would remember her at Blackmore. She was a megastar. Yep. I mean, she took the share price from like $10 to $200 or something. It was just a spectacular rise under her management. She's clearly the standout female CEO in Australia, and I would argue the standout CEO full stop in Australia in the last decade. So she's had that kind of career. She took over Australia Post. She took a $6 million pay cut to take the job. This was an act of public service for her because she'd been very well paid at Blackmores, $8 million a year. This was an act of service for her that she was connected to the business, and she does it very well. And the thing that she did the best, 2 years later, she's crucified for in the most public way. And the emotional shock of that cannot be downplayed, cannot be understated. And you got jerks, actual jerks like Andrew Bolt on in his column, even though he acknowledged a few weeks ago under Terry McCrann's browbeating that what was done to her was wrong, and he had Pauline Hanson on his show to do that. He decided yesterday to undo all that because in expressing her emotion, she did raise the question, which a lot of people have raised, would the Prime Minister have treated a man the way he treated her? And I think it's a valid question because I know the Prime Minister admitted yesterday why he did that. He admitted, because remember, Mark, when we first talked about this, for a long time, I called it faux outrage. I called what he did in that day a performance. I now understand it wasn't. It was actual outrage. Not at the watches. He was not. I mean, Scott Morrison outraged at watches. What a crock. What an absolute crock, right? I mean, this guy takes, multi-$1,000 flights for birthday parties, for crying out loud. What a joke. What he was outraged at was because this had come up and he and his communications minister put their head together and said, we're going to deal with this. We're going to tell her to stand aside. And she was told to stand aside, ordered to stand aside. She said no. Now, what balls does that take? Sorry, Christine, but what does that take to do that? You know why she said no? Not because she knew she'd done nothing wrong. Not just because of that. She knew she'd done nothing wrong. She also knew how perverse it was. It was so twisted because it was for the thing that she had done the best, the thing that literally saved banking services in regional Australia. In fact, let's play, Martin, the clip that Ross Greenwood put on his channel, on his segment, because Ross Greenwood interviewed her the day she announced that deal. What's this few seconds of her announcing the deal and how emotional she is on that day back in 2018, announcing this deal that saved banking services in regional Australia. Just watch this.
The deal with the Commonwealth, NAB and Westpac is worth $225 million over 5 years. Holgate was clearly passionate about the project.
If it was not for the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, then we would have faced suspending this service and cutting post services and undoubtedly hurting local communities and losing jobs. I am so appreciative to Matt Corman and the CBA team.
Yeah, absolutely powerful.
Yeah, and in that emotion, she also she was eternally grateful to these 4 execs who had given up all their weekends, all their holidays, 23 hours a day, working really hard to stare those damn banks down and make them cough up $20 million out of their $10 billion profits, right? The pricks, sorry, the bastards. Edit that out if you have to. Make them cough that up because they were penny pinching jerks, frankly, right? And they had done a brilliant job. And one of her execs, not one who got the watches, one of them was from Deutsche Post in Germany. And when they were talking about how do we acknowledge what these 4 execs did, he said, well, in Germany we give watches. And she thought, that's a great idea. Let's give them a watch because it's something that will mark the time, mark the occasion they did this. I mean, one of those, I want to say something that on the surface might appear shocking. One of those same execs got a $400,000 bonus that year, but it's not really a bonus. The pay is structured so that you get, it's in 2 halves for these execs. They get half their pay guaranteed. They get half their pay, the other half only if they meet their KPIs, their key performance indicators. They're called incentive payments. They have to meet those or they don't get their payment, right? So it's not a bonus. And even Lucio was emphatic about that in the hearing. It's not a bonus. So he had received his salary, but that year he received the rest of it because he'd done a good job. But so when you get what, laymen call a bonus for $400,000, a $5,000 watch is nothing. It's not something that is going to persuade you to do anything, right? What is it? It was recognition. It was a reward by a highly appreciative CEO, not just on her behalf, but on behalf of all of Australia. That's why when she is confronted by this small-minded politician named Kimberly Kitching over these watches 2 years later, and then another small-minded politician in the minister at the Prime Minister's ordering tells her to stand aside, she refused. And because she refused, Martin, and that got back to the Prime Minister, he flipped his wig. And the question is, that's when I think it is relevant. I never made an issue out of this, but I think it is a question: does this Prime Minister have a problem with being defied and being defied by a woman? Right? That's why it's come up. So she, in that context, was monstered by the guy, trashed from the biggest pulpit of the land, right? She's treated abysmally by her by the government and then by the chair, and the chair acknowledged she was treated abysmally, except she doesn't deserve an apology for it. He said, and that drove her into very, very dark places, and she laid that out to the committee, and it was really, really powerful and truthful, right? And that's what politicians have to get here. You cannot just think you're untouchable and there's no consequences for your actions.
Yeah, and I want to make another point, Robbie, which I feel very strongly about as well, and that is that initially the media just followed what ScoMo had said, condemned her left, right and centre. There were those, disgusting cartoons and things also. Nobody thought to ask the why is this happening, what's really going on question. And that to me really underscores the real weakness in our media. They're all on it now, right?
Yeah.
6 months later, right? Because in fact now, of course, they're not going to trip anybody over if they start talking about it, whereas previously that would have meant going against the wind, and they weren't prepared to. They just wobbled with the wind, they're bent with the wind, and that is our media all over. And I'm afraid that just underscores to me that we have a real problem in our media sector as well. We
do. I got two comments though. I want to say this. That also applies to the politicians. Politicians in the mainstream parties are cowards. They, like what I said, this Liberal guy said to me, you can't defend corporate execs. That's cowardice. If there's a truth there, you've got to stick with the truth, right? We were just suspicious that Prime Minister Scott Morrison has no credibility, so therefore whoever is attacking that way, it's worth asking why. And then the truth came tumbling out. We just scratched it a little bit and it came tumbling out. The second thing, though, about the media is this. There's a reason. There's absolutely a reason that they act that way, Martin, because they're an outrage machine. And that's how they influence political outcomes, right? It's in their interest for the collective media influence to be at its peak, to keep the outrage machine going. They want politicians to be afraid of the outrage machine. Stuff the truth, stuff the consequences. So at the time, the outrage machine was focused on the watchers, the fat cat executives. Now we've turned it all around. Suddenly, the outrage machine is at Scott Morrison and co. It's still the outrage machine. I got no credit. I got no time for them. Right? Sorry. The future of Australia, if all we Australian citizens don't depend on the media to give you the truth about the things that are important for our future. Right? We'll win them over, some of them individually, but as a pack, no way. That's why independent media like this is so important, right? There's a crazy side to social media, but there is a genuinely good side where if you treat it seriously, like this channel and like we try and do on our channel, it's very, very important. It can have a really good impact. Stick with us. Tell your friends to watch us. Right? That's how you'll know. You want to know the truth
share
about something?
And like.
Yeah. A lot of people, the show we did about 3 or 4 weeks ago now on the privatisation, and that was based on this very lengthy article I wrote. That's being shared everywhere at the moment, right? And people are noting, well, hang on, this just came out this week. Why isn't this article 4 weeks ago? Well, it wasn't hidden, right? We've been exposing this stuff. Now all the media is jumping on it. There was, in fact, a very good one in the Australia in the Fin Review, saying BCG is the issue. Just quickly, I've got to say this about the media as well. I'm not going to let them get away with this. On the day, David Rowe, the cartoonist for the Australian, for the Fin Review, whipped out this cartoon, and it shattered Christine Holgate on the weekend when it was in the Fin Review, because it clearly depicts her as a prostitute. I mean, look at it on the screen. We'll put it on the screen. It's called Time to Go. It's got the symbology of the watches, etc. But the depiction of her in the background this is a woman that the Prime Minister has used and he's done with her. Well, what is that? Now David Rowe and Michael Stutchbury, the editor at the AFR, are pretending, they're trying to claim that's got nothing to do with being a prostitute. Give me a break. It was a you were part of the disgusting knee-jerk reaction to it at the time. There was no sympathy for Christine Holgate. You could just pile on. And I must say, it was before the treatment of women thing really blew up in the last few weeks as well, right? They probably wouldn't be going to even do that today, if regardless of Christine Holgate. But don't rewrite history. You did it, right? Everybody has to take responsibility for these things. You are responsible for the truth, and if you're not going to be, get out of business, right? Don't pretend it didn't happen. I will say this though: I think David Rowe has tried to redeem himself a bit, because he came up with a killer cartoon on the day of Christine Holgate taking. We'll put on the screen Christine Holgate mailing Scott Morrison as a parcel. And then there's also a good David Pope cartoon that we can put on the screen. People can have a look at this one. The quality of those cartoons shows you that the public perception has well and truly changed. And I know I get bombarded with people telling me, look, I've been talking about this for ages, and no one, people weren't listening. They just they're hung up on the watches. Now they've seen Christine's testimony. They're like, they get it, and people are overwhelmed. One guy who had thought it was all about the watches, his comment was, my God, look how gracious she is, right? You got to give people you can't do this stuff in sound bites, which is the other problem with modern media, as we know. People got to be exposed to ideas. Read a book, read a lengthy article, watch a lengthy interview. You got to have that exposure to, if you have any commitment to the truth, you got to take the time to do that stuff. A lot of people did that on Tuesday, and they finally got the sense of what was really going on, and it's massively transformed public opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's some really interesting questions still outstanding, right? So we seem to have, in theory, 2 CEOs for Australia Post. So, somehow they've got to unpick that. And interestingly, Christine Holgate said that she would be prepared to still be the CEO of Australia Post, but only if the chair left. And that really ups the stakes, but I think is a very fair statement.
Well, and I want people to think of this in terms of, this is our responsibility. Think of it this way. So Sarah Hanson-Young was the chair of that hearing, and I think she did a very good job. And it probably occurred to her at the time, maybe just before that, or sometime during it, someone would have said, Sarah, this is the media are playing this live all day, right? At a certain point, it would have occurred to everyone, this is the biggest hearing in memorable history. I mean, everyone remembers the Kerry Packer tax hearing that time and whatever, but this was as big as that, if not bigger. And the stakes, of course, are much, much higher, much more emotional, much more dramatic.
Yep.
But then Sarah Hanson-Young goes on radio the next day and says, she doesn't think Christine Holgate can return to Australia Post because it'll be unworkable. And that's the part that just drives me nuts, because there's no, it's not like there's we've had an earthquake in Australia, so that Victoria is now an unbridgeable gulf away from New South Wales, and Christine Holgate can't physically go from Sydney back to Melbourne to the headquarters of Australia Post and run it. That would be unworkable if that happened, right? This is just about human decision making, and I will not accept that the small-mindedness of politicians and how they think the calculations work should rule the day here. This is something we as the stakeholders in Australia Post must demand. The facts are, it's our organisation. We're all stakeholders as Australians. It's our national asset and a very important national service. We all recognise that. It's got other stakeholders that are more invested than us, the unions, the customers, and we're all, the Australian citizens and the customers are one and the same thing, and the licensed post offices. And of all those, the ones with the skin in the game are the licensed post offices. They've invested collectively $3 billion into this as private businesses to provide our postal services. The unions want her back. The licensed post offices sure as hell want her back. In fact, are demanding her back. And we should want her back. Why? Not because she's some superstar, but because she showed how, with the right person, can run a government business enterprise properly and make it work. She didn't invent the corporatisation of Australia Post. That was there when she got there. She didn't invent high salaries for executives that people, get a bit uncomfortable with. That was there when she got there. In fact, it reduced for when she got there, right? Much reduced. She didn't invent that. She's got the organisation she was given, and she said, how do we make this work? And she's got these people over here saying, you've got to cut services, cut banking services, cut everything. And she goes, no, this is a service first and foremost, but it's got to be funded. You, the government, say you will not give us money, and they do not give them money, right? It says on the Communications Department website that Australia Post is expected to operate commercially and does not receive money from the government. So when she said that day it's not taxpayers' money, she was right. Scott Morrison's wrong. Paul Fletcher's wrong. The Labor Party's wrong. It's in the website. It's based on a law the Labor Party set up in 1989. Right? So it gets no money from the taxpayer. It pays taxes. Yes, we own it, but it contributes to the tax pool. And she made that work. She made it work really well. And then there's these entities there at the board and the chair. The board is completely stacked by Liberal Party hacks that would be useless in any business enterprise, right? I've had business people who know them tell me that they would never get on any shortlist to get on a proper business board, right? And that's especially relevant because they're liberals and they love big business, but they're useless. They are political hacks. They've been stacked on the board. The chair has been stacked there to ram through this cost-cutting, service-cutting, privatisation agenda, and that's who she ran up against. So we, as the Australian people and the stakeholders in Australia Post, must demand that this episode proves the only just outcome is that board must be replaced in its entirety. It must be replaced by a properly qualified board that is balanced by the inclusion of one representative from the staff and one representative from the licensed post offices, the two biggest direct stakeholders in the organisation. They should be represented on the board as well, directly, people from a union member and an LPO representative, right, should be on there. And the chair must be properly chosen and not be someone with an agenda. And Christine Holgate, the person who has the track record of having run the organisation properly, must be reinstated. So what I'm saying to the viewer, that's the campaign that we're going on. And you can join us or not, but just as we started this on our own in the first place, that's our demand. We will not rest until that is achieved, right? Because this must be a catalyst for far-reaching reform at this organisation and potentially as a model for all other government business enterprises, right? You cannot have a well-run organisation that on the whim of a few politicians can be devastated in the space of 12 hours.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what we've got to change.
Yeah, I agree, Robbie. And it's interesting, of course, because the LPO representative said that the person who should have been representing on the board has never actually been in touch with them, right? So that shows that process is not working. Secondly, of course, we know that the LPOs are absolutely behind what she did, and effectively they see light at the end of the tunnel in terms of how their businesses could work. And remember that, they did say, the chair did say, well, we're not going to close any of those outlets. But the fact of the matter is, of course, that they're small businesses owned by those individual operators. And if they are unable to make the business work because it's economically not sustainable, and it was proved not to be so, then, the writing's on the wall anyway. So essentially, the only route back is to execute the strategy that Christine actually identified and ran with, despite the fact that it goes completely counter to the BCG, slice them and dice them and sell it off, right? And the point is that is the route to provide the services that Australians across the country, and particularly in regional areas, should expect and need.
So I just want to make it clear, though, Martin, what we're up against in demanding that, because you can see it in the public statements of the key government members immediately following her testimony. This is coming from the statements from the Prime Minister, the Communications Minister, and a few others. And it's their reaction to Christine Holgate's testimony, and it would have been workshopped and all kinds of stuff, right? They're in the foxhole, they're covering their asses, and it's the way they're choosing to say it. We need to be aware of that. So they're emphasising that it's the issue of we're protecting taxpayers' money. Absolute crap you are, right? You weren't caring about that. And in fact, in this Paul Fletcher testimony we played earlier, in the Ross Greenwood, not testimony, his Ross Greenwood interview, he says towards the end that we had to do this because a Labor senator in Kimberley Kitching raised it, and we had to respond. And Samantha Maiden on Twitter, the journo, who was actually there all day in the hearing room, she's the only journo who actually was there all day in the hearing room, she scorned that. She says, "Are they serious? They're saying we was scared," right? So it was absolutely, yeah, it was that pathetic. But we're protecting taxpayers' money. Garbage. They chose to quibble on the fact that she was exonerated, and in trying to say, "Oh no, that lawyer's report, the Maddox report, didn't." People say it exonerated. No, it found real problems. Rubbish, absolute rubbish. And in fact, I have a source who said there was two versions of that report, right? The one completed in December and the one released under the pressure of our campaign in January. And the second version had some token language in there, so they could say, that could be interpreted as she did the wrong thing, but they had to say emphatically she broke no rules, wasn't corrupt, wasn't dishonest or anything like that. But the minister made this ridiculous statement in his Ross Greenwood interview, because he said that just because she had a credit card with a $150,000 authorization doesn't mean she was authorized to use it. That is absolute rubbish. The report explicitly says in the rules of Australia Post, if you've got a credit card, your delegation, it's called, your authorization to spend on that credit card for the organisation is up to the limit of the credit card. So she was absolutely authorised, just anything she felt was necessary for the organisation, she was pre-authorised to spend up to $150,000. And she could have spent $150,000 on executive, she spent $20,000. How come I know the Maddox report better than the minister does, Martin? Right? He's brazenly trying to bluff his way through this interview yesterday. So they're trying to, it's staying in the nitpicky universe. We're going to produce a quick video where we've identified all this stuff, and we will go after it one at a time. I'll give you another example. It's the government, it's some media hacks. Janine Perrott did an absolutely awful article in crikey.com.au, and I don't know what her issue is, except it was completely dishonest. All this time later, she included a paragraph in there describing the question of the watches, and she chose to say in that paragraph that the watches came up in the context of the 2020 pandemic recession. At no time, even it's a token acknowledgement, dug back 2 years earlier. This was the first issue that we had to expose, and it was from 2018, not 2020, and that part was total spin and total lie. She chose to repeat that yesterday. What the hell? Where's she coming from, right? So there's a small group of attack dogs with the Prime Minister on this. Some of them are it's funny, Sky News is totally divided, and I would say the real heavyweights on Sky News are on the right side. Alan Jones and Peter Credlin especially. Do you know Peter Credlin, who has a certain reputation, but no one can deny she's a formidable woman. She genuinely is. Her parents were licensed post office operators. She gets it. And even though ideologically she's a liberal and would have neoliberal tendencies, you should see what she's been saying on a show about the privatisation agenda. She's more interested in that. I mean, she's just as interested in that as the personal treatment of Christine Holgate. So, and Alan Jones, etc. But late at night, they have the Paul Murray guy, and he gets Stephen Conroy on there, who was the communications minister under Kevin Rudd. And Stephen Conroy is a total jerk. He just bags Christine Holgate every week that he's on the show. And last night he was doubling down on that. And he said, no, it's about the excessive spending she did at Australia Post. Well, hang on. You, Stephen Conroy, you're the guy who appointed Artman Fahor. You appointed him. You were the communications minister in 2012 when he spent $2.89 million on a junket to the London Olympics for Australia Post's elite customers. You were the minister for that. And now you petty, point-scoring, petulant politician are sitting there holding judgment over Christine Holgate because she spent $20,000 for a reward for the best deal in Australian Post history that you were too pathetic to even think would be possible, right? No way, you're not getting away with this. So whatever your reason for lining up to side with Scott Morrison on this, no, buddy, the Australian people can see right through you, right? So we're going to hit all that in a quick short video. We'll quote them saying it. We'll show you them saying it, and then we'll hit it with the facts. And the big one is the Prime Minister in his press conference yesterday said he denied the issue that gender had anything to do with it, and I can understand him, trying to reflect from that. But then he said the issue here is something like, he said that it's the wise use of resources in the way Australia Post is managed. Well, hang on. If that's the metric, then why did you monster the wisest use of the resources of Australia Post in its history? The person who was the most careful prudential manager of Australia Post, who was so good, she took its existing resources and she grew them for the sake of maintaining the services that we all depend upon. And you're going to pretend that was an unwise use of resources because it involved a absolutely natural recognition reward for the people who made that happen. No, by your own words, you've hanged yourself, and we will show the Australian people that that's the case. So what we have to do, we have to provide a bit of shock therapy here politically, because we have to blast them out of their position, right? They've naturally gone into damage control defense mode. At least they know that it's a massive issue, but that they have to be blasted out of their position. And the more the Australian people do that, the reasonable politicians, and there's plenty of them. I think there's a pretty nasty gang immediately around Scott Morrison, right? The reasonable politicians will do the right thing. I have to say something about Kimberley Kitching.
Thought you might.
So, full disclosure, she attacked me in the hearing, singled me out, singled out my organisation. She asked Christine Holgate how she knows us, because we are the anti-Semitic Citizens Party associated with LaRouche, etc. None of which is true. Absolute garbage. I won't even go into that. Get on our website and find that. When you have shows like ours, Martin, that talk about the financial system, as you know, you attract a lot of comments on things about Rothschild bankers and all that kind of stuff. You never get it from our show. I mean, people may make those comments. We shoot them down as much as we can, as much as practicable. Any honest person who knows our organisation knows the truth of that, right? This was purely weaponising a smear that she tried to do. But that said, I don't care. I'm genuinely happy because it was the truth that she couldn't hide, because otherwise she turned up on the day wearing white. And of course, that had been the campaign: wear white to unite behind Christine Holgate against workplace bullying. And why was that significant? Because she's the person who started all this. She chose to dig back 2 years and find watches, ignoring she would have known the context of the banking deal, right? Don't talk about that. Just talk about the watches to ambush this woman with. And now she knows that it's turned around completely, and she wore white to blend in, hoping that her role in this wouldn't be noticed. But why did she attack me? Because it proves how actually furious she is that it has turned around. And she knows who turned it around, right? And it just so happens that, 2 out of 3 of my tweets on this subject hammer her nonstop, directed at her, at Kimberkit. You started this, own up to it, you should apologise, why did you do it, etc. And she absolutely knows that. So, so I don't care what she said, but I'm just so happy that she felt she needed to wear white. And then she's really infuriated. It's almost like she was in collusion, with the Liberals, because the way they're talking now, they're really angry at her, because it's like she's betrayed them by jumping ship. Right? Suddenly she's out there on Twitter pretending to be Christine Holgate's supporter, and everyone's going, and the Liberals are going, hang on, you started this. And I'm thinking, it's a bit personal with you, Liberals. It really is like you're in collusion with her. And then for political purposes, she's jumped ship first. And I think I might have mentioned this on your show 4 or 5 weeks ago, when we saw a sign of this, where Stephen Jones, the Assistant Treasurer, was the first one to attack the government for its treatment of Christine Holgate. And I said then, the government better watch itself, because Labor started this, but they're the first. They look like they're going to be the first ones out the door and leave the government holding the can, and that's exactly what's happening. And I just love it, because it really proves how much the issue has turned around.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. We'll leave this an open question, but you wonder how Kimberley got the info as to the watches in the first place, right? We'll leave that as a hanging question, but it's worth people perhaps around the committee asking.
There's a second day here. There's a second day hearings probably next week.
Yeah.
So who knows what might come out of that?
Might be worth thinking about that. But the other thing, Christine did specifically mention Josh Frydenberg and the fact that he had supported and was actually very helpful in landing the deal with the banks. Now, that's very significant, despite the fact that in the last 2 or 3 days he was sort of rubbishing it all, right? The fact is, he was actually on the side of the good guys 2 years ago.
Yeah, and he was the new treasurer then. He'd only been in the job a month, but she does definitely credit him. The banks needed to be persuaded, put it that way, to come across and do the deal, and at the 11th hour he had helped to do that. Believe it or not, her board had given her a deadline, Martin, of the 30th of September to do a deal with the banks, or they would scrap the banking services at Australia Post. And she was that's why she's so emotional in that clip we played earlier. She was frantic about that, because she knew what that meant for regional communities, right? And yeah, literally at the 11th hour, Josh Frydenberg helped her. But it's very conspicuous now, when all the outrages at Scott Morrison, as he deserves, the second, the likely successor in these political parties, especially in the Liberal Party, is usually the treasurer. And Scott Morrison's had some Teflon qualities for a while, but the gloss is well and truly wearing off at the moment. And that what happens in politics is the sharks start circling. And how does this testimony play into that dynamic? I mean, I don't have a dog in that fight, but as long as however that dynamic plays out and Morrison's power is undermined, as long as that leads to the right outcome for Australia Post, right, where people stop thinking in terms of this fixed, all these the mainstream parties stop thinking in terms of this fixed way. We can say that there should be an apology, etc., but she won't be able to go back. No, she has to go back, because that's the right thing to do, not just for her. In fact, the justice for her is as important as is the least of it, for the good of the country, because she was the best person for the job.
Absolutely. Well, Robbie, it's good to have a chance to explore some of those things, because I think the dimensionality we put around this probably won't be reported anywhere else, right? And it's not over. As you say, there's going to be another hearing, probably, another day's hearing. So,
no, definitely. It should be, the probability is next week, but definitely another day hearing, yeah.
And so that'll be worth following through. We'll keep a very close eye on this, because of this critical strategic question about the asset that we got in Australia Post and the critical need we have to keep the Australia Post businesses running and growing in the regional areas and doing the things that Christine envisaged them to do. It's so critical for the future of Australia as well as for that particular business, right? And in a way, that for me is where the centre of gravity needs to go. But folks, sign that petition.
Yes.
Make sure that you sign the petition and support Holgate coming back to run the show, and also getting ScoMo to actually apologise for what is a ridiculously stupid, horrible and totally unnecessary behaviour from our Prime Minister. It's unacceptable, and by the way, I think it does go to form.
Unfortunately, yes. But let me thank the viewers, Martin, of this show, our show, the people who actually don't just watch but get involved. If you participate in any way, signed the petition already, or shared it, or made the phone calls, sent emails, know that you played a role in this, right? Shifting, when you don't have the mass media on side, shifting public opinion is an effort. And what we did was, though, we first shifted the honest politicians, or the ones that are honest on this issue, and got this inquiry. And that came from the people who watched this show and our show and etc., who participated in this campaign. When there was a point in the campaign where it was absolutely this show, because our show is weekly and yours is more flexible. You and I could organise a show within half an hour on the Monday morning. Come on, everyone, make calls, and that's what got this inquiry up, right? And I kid you not, Pete, this show was being watched at the highest levels of government, corporate, even at Australia Post. This show on that day, and if you responded to that, pat yourself on the back. That's good, but don't bask in your own reflected glory, right? Don't rest on your laurels. You got to keep it up but do it happily. It's worth it. So yes, share the sign and share that petition and just keep sharing it. Let's get that up. We will. The other thing we want people to do, we can provide the link, but now is also the good time. You need to keep calling politicians now. Call your local member, call your senators, and just say you must reinstate Christine Holgate. Just keep saying that, right? Because they know it's topical. You've got to get it through to them that this is what the public wants. And that, by the time Parliament, we'll have the next hearing next week, other things will come out of that. By the time Parliament resumes, mate, I can't wait to see how they're running around the hallways trying to figure this one out.
Absolutely. I will just add one coda. Last time I looked, there were about, 22, 24 submissions on the inquiry website, right? Yeah. Now, we know that there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of submissions that were made by groups and individuals which haven't yet been recognised, right? So somewhere in the system, they're probably going to do that, that's communication, that's not a submission trick. Once again, like they did with the cash ban, and it's not the first time they've done it, right? So 2 observations. One, if you did put your submission and it's not on the website, recognise that that's what's gone on. So don't assume it just didn't land. And The other is to the people who are running the inquiry, you've still got time to put those other ones up. It will be good. It will be good to do it.
You do. People, feel free to call, guys, if your submission wasn't published, and ask where it is.
Yep.
Right? And no, I do think I'm a bit more optimistic that this committee may put more up, because it's not chaired by someone from the government. It's chaired by Sarah Hanson-Young. But they might need to be nudged in the right direction. So definitely call the committee and say, I made a submission, where is it?
Yeah, Robbie, I appreciate your time today. Very valuable conversation. We'll keep our fingers on the pulse on this, and we're not going to let anybody get away with anything here, right? This is really, really, really important.
Hey, and thank you, Martin. Like I said, it's not just your viewers. Thank you, but can I also say I got to thank Bob Catter. He was the first politician to actually defend Christine Holgate when everyone else was ducking for cover. You've got to acknowledge that, and you've also got to acknowledge Pauline Hanson, who was the one who made this inquiry happen, because she responded to you guys, though. She responded to the public here and did the right thing. But she also has her own connection to Australia Post. You probably heard something about that. Mostly it's misreported, but that's not the point. She made it happen, because that's what happens. The non-major parties actually activate and do things. They are more honest in their approach. Whatever you don't have to agree with them on everything, but this was quite important. So there's been a team effort, but back to thanking you again, Martin. It's providing a forum like this is incredibly valuable. So thank you.
Well, thanks, and we'll keep doing it. And just as a postscript, for those watching, I've got Senator Gerard Rennick coming on my show next Tuesday to talk about the Reserve Bank, monetary policy. In other words, picking up the questions that he threw at Guy Debelle, the Deputy Governor, the other week. So that'll be worth watching as well. So we're going to keep stirring because these are critical issues.
Yep. We're the government in exile.
Absolutely. Thanks, Robbie. See you later.
Thanks, Martin.